With changing regulatory landscape, both in India as well as globally, particularly from the US FDA side, there have been increasing challenges for Indian pharma. More so in the recent past. We've seen stock markets go haywire with one 483 form coming into picture or a warning letter for Indian firms coming into picture. What is the road ahead for Indian pharma? What are the learnings? Where is it that they're going right or going wrong? To discuss all this, we have with us Dr. Ajaz Hussain, Senior Advisor, KPMG. He has a long history of dealing with firms who have been struck in the crosshairs with the US FDA. He is an ex-US FDA himself and has a lot of learnings for the Indian pharma. Thank you so much, Dr. Hussain, for speaking with CNBC TV 18. You've had a long history of dealing with companies who have had some issues with from the compliance perspective on GMP side. In your assessment, in your experience of dealing with these companies, what are some of the lingering issues that you feel have yet not been solved in so many years? And what would be 2 or 3 key areas that, according to you, Indian companies really need to focus on?
Pharmaceutical GMPs are based on the assumption that your processes are under control, and we go through a process which we call process validation to achieve a state of control. And not having a state of control is a source of many of the challenges that we see. If you look at pharmaceutical manufacturing, not that of API, which is essentially a physical process. And often we don't understand the physical attributes as well as we understand the chemical attributes. We can do very well in purity and impurity assessment, but when it comes to dissolution, when it comes to physical attributes like blending time and so forth, we struggle. And given that we quote unquote have validated the process, there is an expectation placed upon the manufacturing operations that this is done. What's happening? Why are you so slow? So you underestimate the complexity in manufacturing. So you don't have the right resources. You don't pay that much attention to training. You don't pay that much attention to the raw material you're purchasing, and therefore mistakes happen. Therefore, issues come up where serious decisions such as batch rejection comes to be. And when you don't have the level of empowerment and understanding within an organization of how complex the manufacturing process is, undue pressure is built upon them. And that often is at the root cause of some of the deviations, some of the irrational behaviors, like breaches in data integrity, that we see. Otherwise, you're rejecting a batch. And much of the GMP remediation process that people go through, remember, we make 2 products, real product for the real patients and the paper products for the regulators, correct? GMP remediation cleans up the paper product, forgetting the real product and the real manufacturing process. Therefore, most GMP remediations are utterly ineffective.
So you mean to say the way companies have been responding,
yes,
or the way even the regulators are looking at these
correct,
issues, there is some things to change still?
Very much. And in fact, I spent most of my career at FDA launching an initiative which we call Process Analytical Technology Initiative, which focused on these very questions. The FDA's 21st Century Initiative was exactly focused on this. So few companies like the major pharma in the US have progressed in this direction. Much of generic industry, much of companies in India have not.
Okay.
And therefore, I think the reason I had launched the FDA initiative in the year 2000 was there we had the warning letters for major companies. Schering-Plough had just gone under consent decree. You had Warner-Lambert warning letter, you had GSK and warning letter. We were facing the same challenges. And simply correcting the paperwork would not solve the problem.
But then, what is the issue then? If we talk from the data integrity perspective, correct, it is one of the key issues which is plaguing the Indian industry. Correct. If we look at from the perspective of US FDA, correct, why has it been so difficult for Indian companies to crack that?
It is. I mean, this is not just US. So I would suggest that this is a global phenomenon. What FDA is observing today, what the inspectors are observing today, is it something new? or it has always been there. I bet it has always been there. The inspectors never figured out how to look at it. First of all, when I look at it, my as a taxpayer, I have to complain to FDA. Now I'm a taxpayer. I'm not an FDA anymore. I said, how can you be so heterogeneous in your inspections? One inspector comes, you have a massive problem. The next inspector comes, is 0483. Get your act together, FDA. Is sort of, as a taxpayer, I have to challenge them. You're not doing a good job from a FDA, from a US citizen's perspective. You have to improve your inspection capabilities. You have to get regulatory heterogeneity down, because I see MHRA coming in, completely different response, FDA coming in.
Yep.
Not acceptable as a citizen. So now hopefully they will start improving this.
So the issue is, you are saying also from the perspective of the regulator.
Of course.
Just now that US FDA has started to really focus on data integrity as an issue, particularly from the generics manufacturers.
Correct. So I think, why did they start focusing? In the sense, my frustration at FDA as a regulator was that FDA tends to be highly dependent on somebody from inside calling FDA to say these are the problems. Why can't FDA find it themselves?
So the proactive nature from the US FDA is coming in now.
So I think the nuance in India, I think what has happened is it has given a false sense of everything is fine. We have been inspected for 10 years. I said, look, don't depend on FDA inspectors. That's a thin slice of what FDA can see in a few days. You're making the products for the patients. Any day you're making, you're fully compliant. You're not waiting for FDA to tell you how to be compliant. So the last inspection determines what your quality is. That's unfortunate.
So the proactive versus the reactive.
Correct.
We've also seen, if we talk from non-uniformity or heterogeneity,
Correct.
even in terms of how an inspection is looked at or how a particular observation is looked at. So from the company's perspective, how do they assess which is a critical observation, which is a severe observation, which is a minor observation?
One aspect which is important is there's nothing minor about any of the observations.
Okay.
So that's a very different approach than, say, MHRA and so forth. That the compliance officers who are sitting in Washington will look at it from a systems perspective. Right? A simple, what one might consider a minor, if that minor observation has repeated 2 or 3 times, it's a major observation, because you have never learned, you have never corrected, even after we pointed this out.
Okay.
All right. So it depends on the context in which those observations are happening. Now, if there are multiple observations, and if this observation links to some other observations, and so it might be on its own be considered minor, but in the overall picture, it points to systematic failure.
So like how the EU regulators list it as minor, severe,
Correct.
or critical.
Correct. FDA doesn't do that.
FDA doesn't do that.
You have to remember, in one aspect, FDA is different in this regard. This is a legal issue. You have promised to do this. You have committed to doing this.
Right.
You said this, you're not doing that. And that is a risk factor from an FDA perspective, because what is quality assurance? In US, GMPs are part of the law, FDA&C Act.
Right.
And in that part, US FDA is a law enforcement agency, unlike MHRA and so forth.
Indian companies supply across the globe, so
Correct.
they have to deal with multiple regulatory agencies. How do Indian companies balance that? Because like you yourself mentioned, sometimes the MHRA would come and clear a plant, but US FDA will find problems. How can companies deal with this?
The answer is very simple. Many companies do it very successfully. And I won't name them here because that might not be too appropriate. And that is, they take ownership of quality. They know what quality is. They focus on quality. And there are differences in some regulatory requirements. And that's a minor way of handling that. In the sense, fine, you need this additional study done this way. Perfectly fine, we'll do that for you. But the core aspect of quality remains the same.
So is there an international standard that they have to adhere to, like the
No,
ICH?
I think one international standard is treat people the same way. One patient in India is the same patient in America. I'm not going to put different quality for you and different quality for Americans. That's fundamental human aspect that we have to follow. But if you say, I'm going to have this quality for India, this quality for Africa, this quality for America, you are on the wrong footing.
Because some of the companies in the recent past have said that because dealing with multiple regulatory standards also increases cost for them. So
it does.
They would stop filing products from a US FDA plant for emerging markets, let's say for Brazil or for Mexico or for maybe for India even. And they are trying to segregate plants based on the markets that they service. Is that a fair way forward?
I think you have to be pragmatic.
And does US FDA have a view on segregating markets for plants?
They do have a view on that, in the sense if you have different standards for different people, they said, all right, we need to be careful with these guys because they're just complying with whatever it is. They're not taking ownership of quality.
So that may possibly not be the best way forward.
It's not a best way forward.